maps here. Don't forget the mind maps are gonna, like, I know in September, you might think, how useful are these? Believe me when I tell you, when you get to March, April, May next year, these are gonna come in very handy. Let's go over the key elements of Heaney's poetry. I'll do the Platt one during the week, because I know some classes I'm doing Heaney, others I'm doing Platt. Okay, what do we know about Heaney? He's an extraordinarily interesting poet who writes with a directness and an honesty which is interesting, but also whose work has just unbelievable complexity and subtlety, and that phrase I use, I know it's a cliche, it rewards repeated reading. I love the line from McCall, next thing he spoke and I nearly said I loved him. 12 words, 13 syllables, monosyllabic language, direct and powerful. And one of the things you get in Heaney's poetry is relationships. A call like the Harvest Bow, and to a lesser extent a Constable Calls, but he does feature in the Constable Calls, is about his dad, who he loves so much. And it's about reflection and love and how difficult relationships can be. And there's the last line of a call, which is just, we love you, Heaney. These are the 7 Heaney poems that I teach in, between class and video content. There are other poems like The Forge and The Skunk that, colleagues of mine like to teach. There's 12 poems prescribed for most poets, and you have to teach 6 or 7 of them to your students. Those are the ones I do, because I like the mixture between the personal and the political, or the social commentary. So you get social commentary in the Constable Calls and Tolland Man, and then you get personal poems in Mossbawn Sunlight, Harvest Bow, Postscript, The Call and the Underground, okay? All about relationships. So when you think about Heaney, you're thinking about themes to do with personal, family relationships, love, appreciation, I suppose, of the ordinary, or things that are seen to be banal, very much in Patrick Kavanagh's tradition. He is interested in the passage of time, and his poems often, have time shifts. So at the end of a Constable Call is a good example. Tolland Man jumping from Iron Age Denmark into, the 20th century, with the murder of those 4 young brothers. The Harvest Bow, him sitting in his kitchen writing the poem, but remembering being a child, going out walking with his father at harvest time. Mossbawn Sunlight, again, as a memory poem. There's so many, and that idea of the passage of time is an important element in his poetry. And he is interesting, because he was writing, some of the poems in the course were written in the 1970s, when his home place was on fire. Like Northern Ireland was really going through a lot of civil conflict, and Heaney wasn't a political writer, but he did write poems which explored, I suppose, in a very, very, very subtle way, the complexities of where that conflict came from, the outcome of that conflict, I suppose. And that's where I think a Constable Calls and the Tolland Man are so important in my preparation of Heaney as a poet. Narrative style, like so many poets, you meet characters, there are pen portraits of all these people in his work. He brings places to life. Postscript is a great example of that. The Flaggy Shore, the west of Ireland, West Clare. Mossbawn Sunlight is a great example of that. A Constable Calls, that kitchen is brought, the same kitchen as Mossbawn Sunlight, that's brought to life, vividly dramatised. There's atmosphere, he pays attention to detail. He's a brilliant, storyteller. And it's through those stories that he explores his thematic concerns. And one of the key elements, as I said, is these pen portraits, these descriptions of people. And those, they're so detailed and so believable, I suppose, and authentic. This depiction of Mary Heaney and Mossbawn, his father, Patrick, in A Call, and in the Harvest Bow, his wife in the Underground, the Tolland Man in that poem, the REC Constable in A Constable Calls. That this time he takes to paint these, characters, to create these characters with words, it adds a humanity to his work, and it highlights, Heaney's, the importance he places on the individual, the people that we have in our lives that play such an important role. And of course, his work is so personal. He's a lyric poet. He writes personal poetry, but it's so easy to relate to it because, we all have a Mary Heaney in our life. We all have people who, have brought tension into our life, like the police constable. We all have, relationships with parents or parent figures that can be complex and difficult. So, those pen portraits, I love them as an aspect of his style. Some of the great, you have to learn quotes for your Leaving Cert. If you're going to talk about Heaney's ability to use language in a vivid or particular way, just to talk about his ability to evoke place. I love the image of the ocean on one side is wild with foam and glitter from Postscript. I mean, you can pick any line from Postscript and you get a vivid image. That's a brilliant. It's that, alliteration of the W. It's that the use of glitter, which is such a vivid words there. The personification of the ocean, but it is alive. It's moving, and waves are bursting. You can see the foam and glitter as the sun shines off it, and there's a vivid quality to that. That's fantastic. I love that description, that really kind of languid, relaxed description of a summer's day during his childhood in Mossbawn in County Derry, the family farm. The sun stood like a griddle cooling against the wall of each long afternoon. And that, warm and quiet atmosphere reflects the warmth of the memory, the little symbol or simile like a griddle. The griddle is like a source of heat. And the sibilance of the S, the sibilance, the repetitive of the S sound. Just so many interesting things. And, again, even when he was, I've never been to Jutland. Well, I have been to Jutland, but I've never been to a Jutland bog. But he brings me there and he shows me where Talon Man was found, where he was dug out from the turf cutter's honeycombed workings. We all know the shape of a honeycomb. And suddenly we can see this landscape which has been dug out in a honeycomb shape, and that's where Talon Man was found. So his ability to, that's cinematic. His ability to create like cinematic description of place is a feature of his style of writing that's interesting. Other important features of his style of writing, night and darkness imagery and the harvest bow. I love that image of, the bow brightens as it tightens twist by twist into a noble corona. And then he calls it, I cut that quote off there because I use it later on, but then throw away love not a straw. But just listen to you have the assonance of brightens and tightens, the internal rhyming of that. You have the alliteration of twist and the repetition of twist by twist. And then you have this burst of light, a corona, but a noble corona. And it's like as he remembers his father making the bow and the skill of his father's, big farmer's hands making this delicate bow. The love and understanding dawns on him. It's beautiful. One of my favourite lines from Heaney is, "And here is love, like a tinsmith scoop, sunk past its gleam in the meal bin." It's just, what does it mean? Literally he's referring to the measurement, the instrument used to measure the amount of meal or the amount of flour needed to bake. But he's talking about the little things in life that, we take for granted. We just presume they're always going to be there until they're not. And when he talks about here is love, he's not talking about the fucking tinsmith scoop, because he says like a tinsmith scoop. He's talking about his Aunt Mary, who was always there, wasn't she? She was always there, and then suddenly she's not there anymore. And it's only when she's not there that you miss her. Same way as when you're used to having, an instrument and where is it? I can't find it. And it's only when you can't find it that you realise how important it is. Nature imagery features in so many of his poems. One of my favourite ones, the surface of a slate grey lake is lit by the earthed lightning of a flock of swans. And you go, fucking hell, vivid, cinematic, clear. That sibilance again of the S, surface, slate, is, and swans. And then you have the earthed lightning, and you get what he means by that when he sees it, wow. When you have this juxtaposition of slate grey, which is, unexciting and, dull, with this fucking flash of, light, earthed lightning. And it's just, I get too into this stuff. I know I do, and I'm sorry. But isn't that just a brilliant way of talking about life? Life is often boring, but if you have your eyes open, if you're ready to embrace it, there are good times. But you have to, they pass quickly. So, be aware of them, and they can really electrify a day. I love that so much. The reference to this is how death would summon every man in a call is brilliant. That reference to literary, the presence of death, the grim reaper, and every man. And then the reference to the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice in the Underground is also an enriching aspect of his style of writing, although nobody will ever write that down. Time shifts, as I say, feature in a number of poems. Students say, well, okay, you've told me that, but how would I talk about it? Well, it depends on the question, but obviously the time shifts are very, 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 they often ask about how a writer's style is interesting or innovative or creative or imaginative or whatever. There's a video already on here about the type of wording that they use in poetry essays. And, his ability to create time shifts is really, really interesting, because what it does is it highlights the interconnectivity between the past and the present. So what happens in the past does not stay in the past. What happens in the past affects the world we live in now, and the world we live in now affects the future. That's a consideration that you see in so many of his poems. For me, the most important thing you have to remember for all these poets is learning the symbols that they use. It's the symbols that they use that unlock, and for me anyway, make the poetry interesting. Make the poetry, zing off the page, pop off the page, make me think. And I know we live in a world today where we're not supposed to want to think anymore. And I know your generation is often patronized for being the 30-second time span, but that's bullshit. We all know it. What we know is that, we're all, it's nice to be challenged. So when he ends A Constable Calls with that reference to, and the bicycle ticked, 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 there's wonderful meaning to that. He doesn't never says that he thinks that the scene described, the microcosm of life in Northern Ireland described in that poem, A Constable Calls, of oppression, that led to the explosion of civil and social unrest that came 30 years later after the poem was written. He never says that, but the suggestion is there, and it's ominous and interesting. The Doomsday Book reference is another example, by the way, of a historical allusion in A Constable Calls. What a brilliant symbol that is. The Doomsday, the symbol of Norman oppression of the English, and him calling the ledger that the constable uses to write in his accounts a Doomsday Book. So, the sense of being oppressed is so obvious there. The plaque of heat in Mossbawn sunlight, that open an oven, you feel that heat unavoidable, as a symbol for love, that you just remember, he's remembering his aunt, and he's struck by this warmth and this love. The tinsmith scoop from the same poem I've already explained. The drawn snare, that allusion to it being like a drawn snare in the Harvest Bow. Brilliant, intelligent, clever writing. The light's gone off in the room, apologies. This idea that the bow, which when he thinks of it, reminds him of his dad and fills him with love and affection, but also is the source of pain, like a snare is a trap, because when he looks at the snare, he thinks of his dad, and he missed his dad, and he never said he loved him, and all those kind of complex relationships complexities underneath the relationship. Just so many important symbols. He often uses onomatopoeia to provoke the aural sense, adding a depth and a layer and substance to the description. He often is very, very, very inventive in his noun-adjective combinations, and he often uses compound words. It's a motif in his poetry, those compound words. Slate grey, man-killing parishes, sad freedom, peat brown head. Just clever word combinations. I love sad freedom. It so captures what, the humanity of the Tolland man, as Heaney imagines him being brought to his death. Sad he's going to die, but at least he's going to be set free from his suffering. The hypocrisy of man-killing parishes, the parish being a section of the church which is supposed to promote Christianity, and the little knowing reference that we think we're better than Iron Age, pagans, but really what has changed as he writes that poem, people in his society are still killing other human beings and sacrificing their lives in the name of saving their own community. You know, the nonsense of that behaviour highlighted by the reference to the Tolland man. There's just so many really interesting things about his work. I suppose one of the things to remember is his work is deeply, deeply, deeply philosophical. Deeply philosophical. You know, when you read his poems, he's thinking, he's reflecting. And when you read his poems, therefore you think and you reflect. And he never shouts at us. He's never very intense emotionally. It's always controlled. It's always measured. It's always restrained. And then we have this idea, and I think it's at the core of Heaney's poetry, that we should, and well, he never preaches. He's not a preachy poet. But the idea that, you know, the importance of just recognizing the valuable things in our lives, stopping for a moment and saying, thank you. The harvest bow representing his love for his dad, his Aunt Mary baking those scones in that simple act of love, the presence of, you know, the West Clare landscape in our, you know, in his life to make him feel good. He often looks at banal, ordinary things, mundane things, and sees them transform into extraordinary things. And nowhere is that more evident than in that line that the harvest bow is a throwaway. Love not of straw. I just love that line so much. And, you know, I'm not going to do my getting emotional thing, don't worry. But I mean, come on. A love knot, something which binds us to a person, you know, and then throw away something of sorry, there's no dash there, something of intrinsically of no value. He's talking about memory. He's talking about how, you know, material worth is, you know, of no real importance. What's important is what binds us to those people with whom we share our lives. And that for him is what the harvest bow is. And it's one of the reasons I love his poetry so much. Hopefully you might find that a useful little review of Heaney's poetry when you combine it with all the other stuff that we've done. If I've already done Heaney with you, all the other stuff we've done in class. And if I haven't, all the other stuff we will do. The summaries and the model answers and all that stuff. Okay? There we go.